I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic and stroke survivor. That's right. It's done. The deal is done. We're married and it was super cute. So let's just keep going here. I'm going to have to get used to saying Abbassi, Rachel Abbassi, but that's the truth. So here we go. Happy Valentine's Day to all of you lovers out there. And for all of you haters, I get it. I get it. I've always hated Valentine's Day. So I'm with all of you during this time. Okay. Plank challenge. Today is day 13, and good news, it is a rest day. I repeat, a rest day. So don't do a plank today. Try to rest those muscles up, and it's fascinating when you take a day off how much more energy you have the next day to do a plank. Okay, I did the 90 seconds yesterday. And what I do, just for a helpful hint, one thing that I do during a plank is I focus on I count my breaths. I take long, deep breaths and I count them. And that way I'm not waiting through the time. I'm more focusing on something else. And yesterday, because we had a doozy yesterday, I actually started trying to, I can't remember what I was thinking of, but it was something like, I don't know, like what kind of decor I want to put, on the bookshelf or something like that. Like I started trying, it's hard to do to like make your brain go somewhere else when you're straining. But it worked. Like the time went by really fast for me. So just some helpful hints if you're interested. Okay, so the topic today, I wanted to talk about getting active and getting still. I learned in sobriety how important it was in the beginning for me to get active. And then over time, I learned that the counterpart is just as important, and that is getting still. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this because this actually relates very much to what I'm going through with stroke recovery as well. I mentioned last week about talking to my psychiatrist about aligning my activities to my values. So I'll talk about that as well, but I'll get to that later. So I wanted to first start off with what it was like for me when I first got sober. I've talked about this before a little bit, but what it was like for me to go from not holding a drink in my hand anymore to needing to do something for several reasons. One, so that my hands were busy. And two, because I had energy in me that needed to get out. It was like this I guess it's pent up craving, Also, all the emotions, the mental activity that was going on that I would have typically drank and settled that down. That mental activity, I wasn't doing anything to drown it with alcohol. So I needed to actually move my body in order to get that energy in my brain out of me. I mean, this is the concept as it grew in my head, that what I used to do when I was drinking was I had all of this anxiety, fear, depression, and I would just drink to make it go away, to calm it all down. And I was trying to turn my brain off. Well, what I have found since I stopped drinking is one way, the healthier way, to turn my brain down is to exercise, to get busy. Um, that's why I started running. I think the running thing was kind of it wasn't planned that I ended up running in the beginning of sobriety. I just happened to run across a friend that was like, "Hey, do you want to go running after work?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know if I can. I would love to." And she was so patient with me, and that's what we did. And it was, gosh, it was the best thing I could have ever done in early sobriety is have that friend of mine who respected 100% the fact that I had just gotten sober. She was a gift to me. And I should tell her that today. She was a gift to me that I needed right at the right, perfect time in my life. And she introduced me to an activity. I mean, I had run in the past throughout my life, but at this time, it was just the perfect time for me to start doing something new that really pushed me, that was healthy for my body, that was healthy for my brain, to get my body moving and get all of that stuff out of my head and turn down my thoughts. It was almost like a volume switch. The more I ran, the more I could turn down those thoughts. So running was just huge for me. Um, and then I did the flea market flips. So I got really into this show, Flea Market Flip. And I was so inspired by it that I just started, and I was out in West Virginia at the time in Charlestown. So I just started going, there's lots of flea markets out there. So I started going to flea markets and it was a cheap hobby, and the more I did it, the more my boyfriend, my husband now, he was my boyfriend at the time, uh, invested in the tools that were going to be helpful to me to be able to do the flea market flip. So it's really, you need to have the right tools to do something like that. And I was lucky to have that. Later, after, I don't really know why, but oh, I know why. My friend that I went running with had injured herself, and I actually wasn't doing very well either. We both were kind of in pain at this point. I think mine was my hips or no, it was my knees. And she started doing hot yoga and invited me to come. So I'm like, I learned in my program I need to say yes, whether I want to or not, just say yes. So I said yes, and I went to this hot yoga class. It was like 90 degrees inside this room, and I was like, "What is happening?" And I just started sweating, and it was really hard. And while I was doing it, I thought, "This is terrible." But at the very end of it, and I was just dripping with sweat, I thought, this is the best I have felt in years. When I was drinking, I didn't sweat because I was so dehydrated all the time. so, um, so I started doing yoga, hot yoga. I signed up for like a membership, I guess. And we would go there all the time after that. And it was all because I said yes. That's why I learned in sobriety to say yes, even when you don't want to, because you never know when it's going to be something you end up being passionate about. And then, so a couple years later, or a year later, I think it was a year later, COVID hit, and I couldn't go to hot yoga anymore. But I was so addicted to yoga that I started doing yoga at my house. And then the yoga place that I had the membership with, they offered virtual memberships. So I did live classes virtually, and I did that for another, I guess, year. And then I had my stroke, and that was kind of when that got shut down. But I really, and I keep thinking about how I want to get back into it, but I'm not inspired for some reason to get the mat out all the time. I have tried to get back into it. I've talked about it on the podcast, but it's just not there. The passion about it isn't there. I think it's because I don't feel good, and it's really hard to feel inspired to exercise when you don't feel good. That's why I'm drawn to doing push-ups and lifting weights, because I don't know, it's not as much of a time. I don't know. I don't know why I don't mind that. It takes less time. I guess I could easily do 20-minute yoga sessions instead of a whole hour, but I don't know. So, whatever. So yoga was a thing that I got into for a while. I think we all know that Rachel got into being obsessed with work. So that can be a little dangerous, I think. When we get sober, some of us lean really, really far into work. And that's not a bad thing as long as you're balancing work life, you know? And I tended to not do that, which is why it was very devastating for me to walk away from my job, because I was really leaning so far into work and less so into life. And now I'm all into life. Another way to get active is to call someone on the phone. It doesn't seem like much of an activity, but it is. Because just as like I talked about, being able to turn the volume down in your head by doing activities, it kind of works the other way around too for me. If I call someone and start running my mouth, which a lot of times I'm listening, I'm not even running my mouth, but it kind of slows my body down too. So one of them's got to be moving, either my mind, my mouth, or my body. And so calling someone, I think, is a really cool way to get active. So that's why on my world famous schedule, I have a line on there to call somebody, one person a day, at least one person a day. And okay, so let's see. Another thing that I was doing once I got my Weimaraner was I would go hiking with my Weimaraner because she's so active. And there's a reason why I wanted a really active dog, because I was so active. So her and I used to walk miles and miles and miles. And I really like to take her to local parks and go hiking. So that was another thing. And it was a bonus if I could take her somewhere that had somewhere for us to hike, and then there was water somewhere for her to swim in. Oh, I missed that. That was so much fun. Um, so I think as I deal with figuring out what activities are good for me now, a lot of this has to do with pushing our boundaries. And I heard somebody say that this morning in my sobriety meeting about getting uncomfortable. And that's where the saying yes, even though you feel like you're not going to have fun, you can have somebody ask you to do something, you're like, that sounds terrible, and you just say okay. I've done that a million times, especially in sobriety, and I always have fun. I never end up coming home from something that I said yes to and I didn't want to. I never end up coming home and being like, that was awful, I'm never saying yes again. I've really never had that happen. I'm sure it happens to people, but it hasn't happened to me yet. Um, One of the things I really like about doing activities outside, especially um early on in sobriety and now, like doing it early on in sobriety introduced me to this feeling that I guess I wasn't aware of, or maybe I didn't have it when I was drinking. But being outside, I feel so much more connected to a higher power. And I've talked about how my higher power is everything outside of myself. That includes my kids, nature, um, my concept of God, my family, my AA group, people who have passed in my life who believed in me. I feel like, I have put their energy into my higher power. And however you want to say it. But when I go outside, I feel more like I'm a part of the whole universe. I don't feel so much like when I'm inside, when I'm, sitting in my house or I'm sitting in my sewing room or whatever I'm doing, I don't feel as connected to the world as just this tiny little human being inside this big, gigantic universe. But when I go outside, I feel that. I feel more like I'm just a product of this universe, like I'm just a piece of this big gigantic puzzle. And I love to feel that way. It makes me feel like I'm not so special. It makes me feel like I'm not unique and all of that stuff. It makes me feel connected to the human race. It makes me feel all of these things that when I was drinking, I didn't even, if you would have told me that that was possible, I'd look at you like you had three heads. Like, what are you talking about? Let's go get a drink. So, all of these have worked for me, for getting active. But when I was thinking this morning about this idea of getting active, I was thinking about how important it is to do just as much, be still, to get still. And getting still is, for me, related to self-care. That's where I've correlated the two of them, because it's, getting active is taking care of getting the energy out of my body, whether it's my mind or my body energy, turns the volume down in my head or gets the energy out of my body so I'm not all fidgety. And getting still is what I need to do after I get active. After I'm able to do one of these activities, whatever it may be, it's important for me to get still afterwards. And that is because, like, that energy is depleted, and I feel like I am so much more able to, like, look inward when I've gotten rid of all of that energy. I feel like, it's like if you were to be floating in a boat in a lake, and like the wind is blowing and the top of the water is just rippling and stuff and you can't see inside. That's what it's like when I've got all this energy that needs to get out of me. I can't see inside me. But when you go out on a lake and there's no wind and it's still and the top is like glass and you can see under the water, that's what it feels like after I've gotten active and I go do, I go hiking, I go walking, I do whatever I can do. Um, it's like, okay, now the water's calm and I can look inside and I can do a little self-care. So if my activity is, all right, I gotta go, I'm irritated or something like that, I'm gonna go do some push-ups. I'm gonna do some push-ups. I'm gonna do a plank. I'm gonna lift some weights. I'm gonna do some sit-ups and get the energy out of me. Then at that point, once the energy is depleted, then I may go for a walk. And for me, a walk um, outside allows me to also look inward. And maybe a walk, quote unquote, for me these days is really walking very slowly around the block, but I'm just outside and it's quiet, I can look inside and think about, all right, what's going on in there today, Rachel? Are we good? Are we not good? What have you talked about to your psychiatrist lately that maybe we should think about while we walk around the block? And so that's what I mean by getting still. It doesn't necessarily mean that I have to sit down or I have to sit in a meditative form, or I have to lay down in my bed. Like, that's not what I mean by getting still. I mean that the physical and mental energy has been depleted, and now I can just look at myself and say, "Are you okay?" And listen. Listen to see how I respond to that. So self-talk, So somebody also said this morning that I really liked, and I'm going to share it with you. It said, if I'm willing, I have all the time in my day that I need. And that is to get active or get still. So, a lot of times people say, I don't have time to do that. I didn't have time to work out. I didn't have time to do, do the dishes. I don't have time to do. I get it. When my kids were little and after I had divorced, I was living in Charlestown and I was driving to Dulles Airport. That during rush hour is an hour and a half commute both ways. I had 2 kids in grade school, in elementary school, and I was a single mother. So I understand what it's like to not have time. I understand what it's like to not have money, not have time, all of these things. So I'm not being unrealistic when I say that if I'm willing, I have all the time I need. I get what it's like to be busy and not have time. But if we're willing to prioritize, then we have the time that we need for self-care. And one thing that I would do was walk up and down the stairs because I had energy that needed to be depleted. Like, this was when I was still drinking, back when I was a single mother and I had that long commute. But there are ways to still have time, I would go outside and walk around the parking garage and stuff like that because I had energy that needed to get out. And what I had to do was prioritize, because if I didn't, I would sit at my desk all day and I would just get all spun up about whatever it was that was going on at work. And I have to know when to cut that off. And now in sobriety, same thing. I still, different topics, but same thing. I can get all spun up and not prioritize myself. But if I'm willing, I'm going to have time to do the things that I need to take care of myself. I might not have time to do the dishes. I might not have time to vacuum. I might not have time to bathe the kids or whatever it is, But there is always time for self-care. I don't care who you are. You have to take care of yourself or you can't take care of anything else. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about is so I had my psychiatrist appointment this morning on my wedding day. I was starting from the top down, taking care of myself today. So I started with a psychiatrist appointment. Then I went and got my nails done and my eyebrows, and I got my toes done. And then I came home and I got married. So I started from head to toes. I took care of myself today. And one of the things that we talked about today was what we picked up where we left off last week, which was coming up with activities that are enjoyable to me, that are connected to my values. So my values, communication, learning, and health, are the ones that I spoke with her about. So we were talking about the kids, my kids, who are 26 and 22. And we were talking about my niece, and I was telling her the incredible halftime show that my niece did for me, where she mimicked Usher so that I could watch the entertainment in my living room in front of me because I couldn't look at the TV because of my eyes. And so she asked me, so how is your relationship with your kids in comparison to your niece? So I explained, I guess because I kept talking about my niece, and I said, oh no, my kids and I are best friends. Like, we've always been really close, and we talked for hours and all of this stuff. I went on and on and on about my relationship with my kids. And I said, I've been saying something that is consistent the past couple weeks, which is I miss it. I miss when my kids were younger. I miss seeing them all the time. I miss having them in the house. And I've also talked to her about, like last week I was talking about, I miss my brother and my sister and my mom. I miss living in the house with them. Like, I miss being a kid. And it's something that I know I've talked about on the podcast, where I get so caught up in what is like the parts of my life that are over that I can never go back to. And it's just, if I let myself think about that stuff, it can destroy me. It just breaks me down. It makes me so sad when I think about that stuff. And so what she said is, it sounds to me like you're missing one of your values on your list of values, and that is family. And I said, okay, yeah. I mean, I think you're right. It's obvious, and yet I don't have it on my list. I don't have family as a value. And she said, as much as you talk about it, it should be the very first value on the top of your list. But instead, it's like you think that you have to move on without this. Like the family's time is over and now you have to move on or something. But she said, instead, coming up with new activities that are able to nurture your relationships with your family in the phase of your lives that you're in right now. And I said, I would love that. I would love to be able to do that because I feel like I don't pick up the phone and call my family, whether it's my kids or my dad, my mom, um, my brother, my sister. I don't pick up the phone and call as much as I am thinking about them. Like I'm thinking about all of them every day. Um, but yet I never pick up the phone, and I don't know why that is. And so it's something that her and I were going to talk about over the next few weeks, but figuring out how some of my activities in recovery can be oriented towards nurturing my relationships with all of these folks that I just mentioned. So I am in love with that idea. I can't wait. I said, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what you're supposed to do when your kids are gone and your brother and your sister are married and have their own family and you live an hour away from your mom and I can't go there because I can't drive, and my dad is like a couple hours away. Also, like I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't have anybody who has shown me how to do this, how to have long distance family relationships, I guess. I just don't know. Maybe that sounds weird, but I need help. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm excited about that. So if any of you family members are listening, I've got a plan and I'm going to figure out how we're going to be better at this. Whether you think that you're already good at it, I need to get better at it. So we'll figure out what that's going to be. I'm not sure. So I'm pretty excited about that. And that's really all I have today. I wanted to talk about activities and whether it's mentally or physically. And I'm feeling pretty good today, I have to say. I mean, how can you not feel good on your wedding day? You're probably surprised that I'm doing my podcast on my wedding day, but I do it every day. So thank you for listening, and thank you for all of you who reached out to me and said happy wedding day. I really appreciate it. I do. It filled my heart today. My phone was just pinging off the hook today. So I truly appreciate it. And so thanks for tuning in to the Recovery Daily podcast. And I will talk to you tomorrow.